But today what I'd like to share is some of the information that I know from 52 years of riding motorcycles. And that's not 52 years old, that's 52 years I've owned and fooled with motorcycles. I want to share some of the information I know about chains. Assuming you have a chain drive bike, which includes most bikes. There are a few exceptions, but most bikes deal with a chain. This just basic sharing of simple information that I've learned, and not school learning, not from books, just from having done a lot of work on motorcycles. Every bike, and I collect older bikes, my first choice is older bikes of course, but I do have some modern bikes, and what I wanted to know right in the very beginning, the first time I ever replaced a chain, or I thought I might have to replace it, well, I want to know what chain is already on the bike. Now this is funny, our spare GS1100 has a 630 chain. That's an oddball, odd number of chain, odd number of sprockets. It means that the chain is bigger, physically bigger, than a 530. A 530 comes on most bigger bikes, a 520 on most medium-sized bikes. They also sell, and they sell it over the counter or through aftermarket, or you can actually buy it from the dealers, what I call superbike chain. They're about $300 to $350. These are really made for superbikes or for racing. Very, very high quality. Not sure you need one on the street for street riding, but again, everything we do is based on the budget, what we can afford, and trying to get the last amount of value out of what we already have. So what I did, knowing that I was going to do a total restoration on my FZR, what I did, I bought a superbike chain. I went for the big bucks, went for brand new sprockets, and that has so far lasted beyond my wildest dream well. That chain is, I believe, 3 years old now, has almost 15,000 miles, and almost never needs adjustment. Now my West Cooley replica, what I did not, when I had this all apart, I did not want to put another 630 chain on, because the 630 chain is kind of like old technology from the 80s. So I upgraded it with again, a very high quality chain that has now lasted just under 20,000 miles. So it's time to start checking these chains. And another thing, even though this is a relatively low horsepower bike, the RD, when I put the chain on, I went for the money for a very high quality chain. And on this bike, when we bought it and it was ready for restoration, I had a chain that had almost no miles on it. It only had 3 track days, so I put that this chain had 3 track days, and now it had, I believe, about 15,000 miles on the chain. So again, all of these, what's the purpose of saying this? The idea is every bike is a little bit different as to how you use it, how much it weighs, how much horsepower you have, and how aggressively you ride it. Would all be factors into determining how long the chain should last. But there's only one real issue, and it boils down to this. You can go out on the internet and find 100 different ways to check the chain. And there are some good old school ways. And I'm going to try to share what I learned. Now, a good example of what I think is overkill, and I've shared this with many of my mechanic friends that agree. However, I'm sure if you look on the internet, there's a counterpoint to it. In this case, this bike has 16,500 miles. The chain, to me, it's coming up on time to start really checking it. And the reason I've noticed that is, I've noticed after about 3 rides it needs to be adjusted. It's starting to be to the point where it needs more than a normal amount of adjustments to keep it where it should be. Now, the superbike chains, and again, these are about $300, $350. They seem to be a lot more durable. This is a 520 chain. This is a mid-powered bike. I think it's got about 65 horsepower, but it's not going to grind the chain to death in 3,000 miles like a big, heavy, powerful bike will tend to do. And that's why these big, heavy bikes, or very powerful bikes, or powerful, heavy bikes, the bigger chains that are higher quality, the bikes with less horsepower that you ride more casually, like this bike, may get away with using a 520 chain, or a lower quality chain that typically are $125 to $175. Just because I'm trying to keep this very simple. Basic 101 information. Most motorcycles, roughly the ratio of countershaft to the rear sprocket, this sprocket turns 3 times to every time this one turns once. This is an extremely hard steel sprocket. This is really a hardened sprocket. These sometimes aren't really that hard. Some bikes even use aluminum, but they're still steel. Steel, to me, is always the material of choice here. So what some manufacturers recommend is that you replace these as a kit. A chain, 2 sprockets. That's typically $250 to $300. And if you have the money, or if you're just so inclined to want top quality stuff, yeah, that's a good investment, and I think you should do it. But in my case, because we ride this bike a little less casual, Rob rides it, I ride it, and we're not looking for race performance. I'm just looking for more or less for reliability. So this bike, and I've done it on several of the other bikes, that I've gone about 15,000 miles, which is what most people recommend. And then after 15,000 miles, basically check and see where you are, and it's real easy to, I'm going to show that on a real-time video here shortly. But the whole purpose is, the 2 objectives. It would be not to take a chain that still has 5,000 miles of life in it and waste it, unless you have the money, which if you do, congratulations. But to get a reasonable amount of use out of it, but it's exactly like a tire. A tire and a chain are a good analogy. They're both parts that wear out on a bike. They wear out according to use. And if you ride in the rain a lot, don't lube the chain a lot, you're probably going to wear out. Ride in dusty conditions. If you ride out in the desert, sand's going to get in there. And basically just the basic 101s of understanding chains. Most modern chains have O-rings. The old-fashioned ones didn't. They wore out a lot quicker. O-ring chains seal in the grease, hopefully, and if I use chain wax, not chain lube, the chain lube just makes a big greasy frying pan mess out of the whole back of the bike. So I tend to use chain wax, and every other time, at minimum, every other time I ride the bike, I grease it. Put it up on a stand, and hopefully everybody has. If you don't have a stand, a center stand, or you can somehow get the back wheel to spin free, that's the best way I know to check the chain. In fact, what we're going to do now, the alternative way to do this would be to move the bike in your driveway or something, but if you can get it up off the ground, that's really a big help. One method that I've heard a lot of old school people use, it's not my method, I'll show my method last, is they grab a link and see if it comes up, if this were to come up off the sprocket a whole lot, that chain might be ready to be replaced. In this case, we're somewhere in the middle. It's not real tight, it's not real loose. That's probably telling us we're at least in the middle of the life of this chain or a little bit past it. The fact that we have a little bit of play there has nothing to do with adjusting the chain. That's the next part of this. Now this little tip is worth its weight in gold. Here's an example of a bike that looks like the chain is past the midlife of its useful life. You want to be able to spin the wheel for a lot of reasons. What you'll find is if a chain always has a loose spot and a tight spot. Now, with about 1 inch of play, you could measure it scientifically, but that's pretty close to what we want. But what you want to do, it's not going to be the same all over, is move it up a little bit. Oh, it just got a little tighter. Watch what happens. Now it's even a little tighter. Now look. There are tight spots and loose spots. Now that's telling me, even though we're in the midlife of the chain, we have tight spots with probably a few links that, this bike's 7 years old. It's probably, over the winter, some of the links have frozen up, even though I put WD-40 on it regularly and grease and oil in the winter, so that it just keep from corroding and rusting. Now, here's just another thing. Now it's really gotten loose. So what we have here is a chain that's it's about at the midlife of its service life, but this gives me concern, because not only this, it does this too. You see how it's hitting the muffler? So if I let it get sloppy enough, it's going to eventually, on deceleration, start wearing a hole in that muffler, and that muffler is probably inexpensive, probably a $500 thing. So we don't want to do that either. And on some Ducatis and some exotic bikes, it'll wear into the swing arm and you're really in big trouble if this gets too loose. Now, even though we know that if you only check the chain in the midpoint, you were out in a driveway and you said, oh, that chain's fine. Then you move the bike forward 3 feet and all of a sudden it's as loose as a goose. That's not good. So what this means is, now look how tight this is here, and I'm really pushing on it. Tight, tight. So I would think, in my case, I'm going to just replace this chain. I'm not going to fool around. Because number one, to get rid of some of that slop, a lot of times you make a chain too tight, it'll wear out the sprocket on the engine. The bearing by the countershaft sprocket, not good. That's, no matter how I've adjusted this, and I've done this off camera, I've loosened it so that one side of it was correct, but then if you loosen it so this side is correct, the other side gets too floppy. So what it means is we have a chain that's ready for replacement. And this is a good, I'll make a separate video of replacing the chain. I'll make a decision with Rob whether he wants to spend the money for a superbike chain, a fancier chain, or the typical $100, $125 chains that this level of bike has. But see, by having a tight spot and a loose spot, not good. Not good. That's telling me that it's, and that's a simple test you can do before you get stranded on the highway or some other terrible thing happens. Now in this case, that really is that. I probably will want to replace this before I do too much more riding. Now, it's not like, here's the thing, it's not like this is going to just snap and fly off and hit somebody, which in the old days it used to happen with Honda 750s especially. They came with really substandard chains that went through the case. That's not the issue I'm worried about. What I'm worried about is that the performance of the bike, this will tend to, at some point in time, vibrate, give you an annoying vibration in the bike. It'll tend to wear the sprockets out. Now, when I take this apart to put the chain in, I'll check that the sprocket has no wear. Countershaft sprocket, relatively cheap. Back sprocket, a little more expensive. But if you can just get this concept out of this video, that if your chain is like this, and this is a little too tight, now I'll loosen this. But then the other part of it will be really sloppy. So what it means is I'm kind of backed into a wall here where I pretty much, the only choice that I have, the reasonable choice, is to replace the chain. And I hope by showing this little tip, it gives you another way to make your bike more reliable, not spend money you don't have to, and yet do a good job with the maintenance. So I hope that little bit of that information has been usable. It's free, of course. The test to check if your chain is worn out is only a few minutes, and it's worth its weight in gold, especially if you ride far from your house. And if that just look at YouTube at there's a couple of videos of guys having a chain come off. It was so loose, and I know what they did. They just let the adjustment go, because this is a true story too. Back in the old days, Yamaha 350s, Yamaha 400s. Back in those days, it wasn't a critical thing with chains. It wasn't real critical at all. Bikes didn't make 40, 50 horsepower if they were souped up. Nothing really that's going to snap a chain. But as time has gone by, and this bike, or at the ultimate end, the R1, if that chain's even in the middle of its wear, you got really rolling the dice there, in my opinion. And anyway, replacing the chain, we'll make a separate video when we get our new chain. In fact, what I'm going to do while I have the time today, and I do have about another hour before it's time to go get the baby, what I want to do is I'll check all the bikes, and I think this one might be the closest one. I can usually tell when I'm adjusting the chain. If I start to see a chain that has those tight spots, loose spots, and no matter how I adjust this in and out, it's either way too loose on one end, too tight on the other end. And the one thing you never ever want to do is make it so tight that you put that unnecessary wear on the countershaft sprocket. That's really a big no-no. That's something you don't want to resort to that no matter what. And again, like I said, I don't pretend to be some kind of super mechanic. I'm not selling anything, so I'm not trying to sell somebody the windy chain or anything. But I have done a lot of this backyard mechanic stuff on motorcycles. I have a pretty good feel from knowing people like Luciano and Glenn and other people and Vince that do their own maintenance, what tends to work, what doesn't work. And I know I have within my circle of friends, I have some people that have enough money or enough. It's not even a question of having the money. They just take the bike to the dealer and have it done. That's okay too. In fact, I'm jealous. But I still like to know how to do these things. I guess I'm just old school. And maybe I'm just old. I don't know. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the video and that you've picked up some tip you can use. And that very shortly, once we get the chain in-house, we'll show how to take that all apart, clean it properly, check the countershaft sprocket and the other sprocket for wear. They're a very simple test, and that'll be a very... And by the way, there are several other ways of doing this. I may as well show this right now, as long as I have it. This is a tool. I made a copy of a tool. One of my friends bought a tool for about 30 bucks, I think, and it had the... Let me show this. Might be interesting to somebody. This is a tool I made a copy of. And let me show you what happens. I put these little caps on because they're razor blades. And when you check this, the way you check it is, it's a wear gauge. These points are within, I'd say within a couple of thousandths of being accurate, because I checked it on his gauge. And then what happened? I said, why should I spend $30? I can make a pretty good copy of that, close enough for my work. And what you do is you check the center point of 16 links, 16 teeth. And if you have 16 teeth and they get further apart than these 2 points, you definitely do replace the chain. Now what's going to happen if I check this now, on that sloppy part of the chain, it's going to be over, but on the tight part, it's not going to be. Where the links are frozen, it'll be a lot tighter. So just be aware, this is a handy tool, but not the be-all, end-all. But the one way that works every time is what I just showed. And it's a simple backyard mechanic thing. There's no high-tech stuff. You can check it. You can check it every time you adjust the chain or ride the bike. But now, keep in mind one other thing. Because I'm an engineer, I know, and I know it innately, not from even being taught, from airplanes. You have 2 center points where the swing arm pivots and where the countershaft pivots. And as these 2 things go through their rotation, in the middle, at the bottom and at the top, this chain will be the loosest. As you go to the middle, it's going to get just a little tighter. So you never want to have it in that really, really low position that it's a little too tight, because as you take it off the stand, it's going to get tighter. As you sit on a bike, it's probably going to get even a little more tight. But a good way to do it is make it just a little bit loose, get off the bike, put the bike down off of the stand, and then what you have the option to do is, if you can have a friend do it, check it, move the bike forward 3 feet, check it, move the bike forward, check it. Make sure there's no spot at which it's really, really tight. That's the one thing, if you get one thing out of this video, don't make it super over tight in that low position, because as it comes up, when you sit on the bike, it's going to get just a little bit tighter. And most bikes, you make all the adjustments to these adjustments pretty self-explanatory, but then you tighten this nut and it gets just a little tighter. And that's pretty much what every one of these bikes is, exactly the same when it comes to that. But you know, and I don't make the videos and share the videos to sell anything or whatever, so I could wear my white BMW jacket and show everybody how cool I am. What I do is I like to share good information so that when we ride, we're all safe and we all get home after having a really nice ride. So I hope you've enjoyed it, and again, as I always say, thanks for watching.